It's funny how a single sentence can define a lifetime. For me, it was always, "You'll never amount to anything, son." My father, a man forged from steel and disappointment, delivered it with the quiet finality of a judge's verdict. My mother, softer, but just as sharp, would echo it with a sigh, a look of tired pity that cut deeper than any shout. The words followed me from childhood, through my rebellious teens and well into my 20s, when I left home with nothing but a beat-up car and a fire in my belly. That fire wasn't fueled by ambition, not at first. It was fueled by a desperate need to prove them wrong. I never intended to become an investor. I studied engineering, a field my father deemed too soft, too academic. "Engineers build bridges," he'd say, "but they don't own the road." He worked in construction, a proud man who saw the world in tangible things, wood, steel, concrete. He saw me in abstract terms, a dreamer with his head in the clouds. I tried to get his approval, I really did. I brought home good grades, I got a job as an entry-level draftsman, but it was never enough. "You're a cog in the machine, not the engine," he'd tell me. My mother would add, "He's right, honey. You need a real job, a stable one." They pushed me towards something safe, something predictable, something they could understand. The day I left, a cold grey Tuesday in late fall, my father stood on the porch with his arms crossed, a silhouette against the fading light. "Don't come crawling back," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You made your bed." I wanted to shout, to tell him he was wrong, but the words caught in my throat. My mother just watched from the window, her face a mask of what I can only describe as sorrow and relief. Relief that their problem child was finally gone. I drove away with the rearview mirror showing a piece of a life I knew I could never go back to, a life I had to leave to truly live. The first few years were a grind. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a part of the city where the sirens were a nightly lullaby. I worked long hours, first at a small firm, then freelancing, building up a portfolio of small projects. The pay was meager, but the work was mine. I was building something, brick by brick, not for them, but for me. The idea of investing came to me by accident. I was listening to a financial podcast while working late, and the host was talking about real estate, not big-time developers, but small-scale residential properties. He talked about finding hidden value, about buying low and selling high, about creating a portfolio that worked for you. It clicked. This was a different kind of building, a different kind of ownership. This was the engine my father had talked about. I started small. I saved every spare dollar. I lived on ramen and instant coffee. My first investment was a rundown duplex. I spent every weekend, every free moment, gutting it, fixing the plumbing, sanding the floors. The work was hard, physical, the kind my father would have respected. I found a strange satisfaction in it, a connection to the man I desperately wanted to impress, but knew I never could. I sold it a year later for a modest profit, then rolled the money into a bigger project. It became a pattern, a life. I learned the market, I learned the language of finance, the rhythm of acquisitions and sales. The engineering degree was a foundation, a logical mind for problem solving that translated surprisingly well to the world of numbers and spreadsheets. Over the decades, my portfolio grew. I moved from duplexes to apartment buildings, then to commercial real estate. The small profits grew into substantial ones. My anonymity became a shield. I didn't want the notoriety, the spotlight. It felt like a trap, another way for people to judge me. I had an assistant, a legal team, and a financial advisor who handled everything. My name was on no public documents. I was a ghost, a quiet force in the real estate world. I found a certain peace in it, a sense of power without the ego. I was successful, truly successful, on my own terms. I kept in touch with my parents, but the relationship was strained, a collection of phone calls on holidays and dutiful, emotionless visits once a year. They never asked about my work, and I never offered details. They didn't need to know the specifics. Their verdict remained unchanged. "You're doing well enough, I suppose," my father would say, looking around my modest rented apartment. I kept my real home a secret, a place of sanctuary, but it's a fickle world. An honest living is a steady living. He still saw me as a transient figure, a wanderer who hadn't settled down. My mother would nod along. Her eyes filled with the same pity I remembered from so many years ago. It hurt, but I had learned to build a wall around that part of me. The wall was made of my successes, my independence, the life I had built for myself. The distance between us was more than just physical. We lived in different realities. They were trapped in their expectations, in their small town, in the echo of their own unfulfilled dreams. I was free, a builder of empires they couldn't see, a success story they refused to acknowledge. And that was the cruelest part. They would never see the man I had become because they were still looking for the boy they told me I would be. A failure. But the past was about to collide with the present in a way I could never have anticipated. I was a ghost. But soon, I would have to become real. The phone call that changed everything came on a rainy Tuesday morning, the same kind of day I had left home so long ago. My sister, her voice shaky, delivered the news. "They're going to lose the house, Daniel," she said, her voice cracking. "The bank is foreclosing." The words hit me like a physical blow. The old house, the one I had run away from, the one that held all the memories, good and bad. It was the last piece of their world, their stability, the one thing they had always held on to. My first impulse was to send them a check, to just fix it. But something held me back. This was more than a financial problem. This was a lifetime of emotional baggage, a final, painful test. And for the first time, I saw an opportunity, a way to not just fix their problem, but to finally, definitively prove them wrong. The irony of it all was almost poetic. They were losing their home to the very system they had warned me about, the one they thought I could never master. Little did they know I didn't just understand the system. I was the one pulling the strings. I was the silent partner, the unseen force, the investor behind their mortgage bank. The phone call with my sister, Sarah, stretched on, each word another layer of the suffocating reality they were facing. The news wasn't a surprise to her. She had been a buffer between me and our parents for years, privy to their financial struggles, their pride, and their stubborn refusal to ask for help. My father had lost his job a few years back, a victim of an aging industry and an even more aging body. He tried to start his own small construction business, but the market was tough and his health wasn't what it used to be. My mother, a former bookkeeper, had taken on part-time work, but it wasn't enough to cover the mortgage and all the other bills that accumulate over a lifetime. "They've been trying to keep it a secret," Sarah said, her voice a hushed whisper, as if she was afraid they might overhear her. "Dad just keeps saying he's got it handled. But I saw the letters. The notice of default. They have until the end of the month." The silence that followed was thick with the weight of years of unspoken conflict. Sarah and I had always been close, but our relationship was also a reflection of the family's fractured dynamic. She was the peacemaker, the dutiful daughter who stayed close to home while I was the one who had fled. She understood their fears and their pride in a way I couldn't or didn't want to. "Have they talked to the bank?" I asked, my voice flat, professional. The question was a reflex, the kind I asked 100 times a day in my business. "Yes, they've tried. The bank said they've exhausted all options. No more extensions, no more deferments. They want their money." I knew the bank's policies. I had helped set them. The bank, which I'll call Midwestern Regional Bank for our purposes, was a relatively small player in the grand scheme of things, but it was part of a larger investment portfolio I had been building for the last decade. My initial investment was small, just a fraction of the capital they needed to expand. Over time, as my wealth grew, so did my stake. I was a silent partner, a majority shareholder, a ghost in their machine. My legal team had ensured my name was never on the letterhead, never in the public records. I was a faceless entity, a source of capital, a man with a vision, and part of that vision was to operate a bank that was both profitable and ethical. I had pushed for policies that were more lenient than most, longer grace periods, more options for loan restructuring, a human-first approach. But even with my guidance, there were lines that couldn't be crossed. My parents' situation was a prime example. Years of missed payments, multiple modifications to the loan terms, and a mountain of interest that had accumulated. They were what the bank called a high-risk, non-compliant account. "Look, I can help them," I said, the words coming out before I could think. I can just wire the money. Sarah sighed, a long, tired sound. You know they'll never accept it, Daniel. You know how Dad is. He'd rather lose the house than take a handout from you. She was right. The money would be an insult, a stark reminder of their perceived failure and my unexpected success. It would be the final blow to their pride, a public confirmation of everything they had told me I wouldn't be. A handout would be a tacit admission that they were right about me all along, that I was a failure in their eyes, just a man with money, not a man with character. They would reject the help, not because they were ungrateful, but because it would shatter the last shreds of their self-worth. There's another way, I said, a plan forming in my mind. It was reckless, potentially disastrous, but it was the only way I could think of to help them without destroying them. I need you to get me a copy of their mortgage statement, every detail, the account number, the loan balance, everything. Sarah was hesitant. Why? What are you going to do? I'm going to talk to the bank, I said, a deliberate lie. I wasn't going to talk to them, I was going to pull their strings. I was going to manipulate the system from the inside, a chess master moving the pieces without revealing my identity. Just trust me, and don't tell them I'm involved. Don't tell them anything. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and encrypted emails with my legal and financial teams. My primary contact, a brilliant but stoic lawyer named Michael, was the only person who knew the full scope of my holdings. He was the one who had built my wall of anonymity, and he was the one who would now have to breach it, carefully, subtly, and without revealing my name. The account is under foreclosure proceedings, Michael said, his voice a low hum over the phone. Standard protocol. We can't just stop it. It would raise 100 red flags. The compliance department would have a field day. I don't want to stop it, I said. I want to buy the mortgage. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. You want to... What? I want to acquire their debt. I want to buy the loan from the bank. It's a non-performing asset, a write-off for them. We can do it through a shell company, a blind trust. It will be a completely anonymous transaction. Michael's legal mind was already racing, processing the implications. It's unusual. The paperwork would be complex, but it's possible. It would have to be a third party, a completely separate entity. We'd have to create a new trust, a new LLC. We'd need to act fast. Do it, I said, my voice firm. Do whatever it takes. Make it happen, and make sure there are no loose ends. No one, absolutely no one, can know who is behind this. The process was a bureaucratic nightmare. I was a ghost trying to buy a house, a secret identity trying to save a family without them ever knowing. Michael and his team worked around the clock. The shell company was established in a matter of days. The paperwork was filed. The transaction was a series of wire transfers from one anonymous entity to another, a financial ghost passing a debt to another ghost. I watched it all from a distance, a detached observer of my own life. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent a lifetime running from them, building an empire that they would never see, and now I was using that empire to save them, to rescue the very thing I had fled. A week later, Michael called me with an update. It's done, Daniel. The loan has been acquired. The new servicer will be the Northwood Financial Group, a holding company we just created. The bank has officially transferred the debt. Your parents' house is no longer their problem, it's ours. The news was a relief, but also a new kind of burden. I had bought their house, their security, their future, but I hadn't solved the real problem. The emotional chasm between us was still there. I had a plan, a final act in this long-running play. I was going to let them sweat. I was going to let them feel the pressure of the foreclosure, the weight of their own choices. And then, at the last possible moment, I was going to reveal the truth, not with a check, but with the full force of a lifetime of a narrative of failure turned on its head. I was going to show them that their son hadn't just succeeded, he had become the very force that would save them. The stage was set. The final scene was about to begin. The first letter from the new servicer, Northwood Financial Group, arrived in a plain white envelope. My father, in his stubborn denial, almost threw it away, mistaking it for junk mail. My mother, with her bookkeeper's eye for detail, saw the official letterhead and stopped him. The letter was short and to the point. Their mortgage loan had been sold, and all future payments and communications were to be directed to the new entity. The letter offered no explanation, no apology, just the cold, hard facts of the financial world. My parents were confused but not alarmed. They assumed it was a standard business practice, a change of ownership that wouldn't affect their situation. They were wrong. The next letter was a shock. It was a formal notice, a final warning. The full balance of the loan, plus all accumulated fees and interest, was due in 30 days. It was a deadline with a guillotine hanging over it. This wasn't a bank playing hardball. It was the final nail in the coffin. My sister Sarah was a witness to their slow descent into despair. She called me, her voice heavy with emotion. "They're not sleeping," she said. "Dad is walking around like a ghost. He won't talk about it. Mom is just crying all the time. They don't know what to do." I felt a pang of guilt, a sharp, cold jab in my gut. I was the one doing this to them, a puppet master pulling the strings of their lives. But I had to remind myself of the purpose. This wasn't just about the house. It was about the legacy of those hurtful words, the years of feeling like a disappointment. It was about forcing them to face the reality of their situation, to see that their pride and their judgments had led them to this point. I couldn't just bail them out. I had to force them to acknowledge the full weight of their choices. My parents' life was unraveling. The quiet confidence my father had always possessed was gone, replaced by a restless anxiety. He would sit in his favorite armchair, the one he had owned since before I was born, and stare out the window, his hands clasped so tightly, his knuckles were white. My mother, who had always been the emotional core of the family, was now a fragile, tearful shell of her former self. The house, once a fortress of security, had become a prison. Every floorboard creaked with the echo of their mounting fear. The days crawled by, each one bringing them closer to the inevitable. My sister tried to help, but her efforts were met with stubborn resistance. "Don't you worry about us," my father would say, his voice thin and sharp. "I'll handle it." But Sarah knew he couldn't. She called me, a plea for intervention in her voice. "Daniel, please, you have to do something. This is breaking them." "Give it a little more time," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil I felt. I had to see it through. I had to let them reach the bottom before I could offer a hand up. It was a cold, calculated strategy, and it felt terrible. But I knew deep down it was the only way this would ever be resolved. I kept a close eye on the situation, monitoring their account through my financial team. The final payment due date was a week away. The next letter was ready to be sent, a final notice of foreclosure, a legal formality that would trigger the final process. It was time to make my move. I called my parents. My father answered, his voice a low, gravelly sound I barely recognized. "Hello? It's Daniel, Dad." There was a long pause, a heavy silence. "What do you want, son?" "I heard about the house," I said, getting straight to the point. "Sarah told me." Another pause. "It's nothing for you to worry about." "I am worried, Dad. I want to help." "We don't need your charity," he said, the old steel returning to his voice, but it was hollow, a shadow of the man he once was. "We'll figure it out." "You're not going to figure it out, Dad," I said, my voice firm but not angry. "The bank is foreclosing. You're going to lose the house." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could hear my mother's soft cry in the background. My father's voice, when he finally spoke, was a whisper. "How do you know that?" "I know things," I said. "I know how this works." "You don't know anything, boy," he said, the anger flaring up, a last-ditch effort to assert his authority. "You've never had to work for anything real in your life." The words stung, but I didn't react. I just let them hang in the air, a reminder of the long-standing narrative. "I'm coming home, Dad. I want to talk to you, and Mom, face to face." "There's nothing to talk about," he said, and then the line went dead. He had hung up on me. I stood there, the phone in my hand, my heart a complex mix of anger, sorrow, and resolve. He was still the same man, trapped in his own pride and his own failures. But I was not the same boy. I was a man who had built his own world, his own success, in spite of him. I booked a flight for the next morning. The final act was about to begin. The stage was set. The storm was coming. I was going to walk back into their lives, not as the failed son, but as the ghost in the machine, the investor, the one who held their fate in my hands. The reveal would not be a simple conversation. It would be a confrontation, a final reckoning that would either heal us or break us forever. I packed a small bag, just a change of clothes and a manila envelope. Inside, a single piece of paper, a document with my signature and the official seal of the Northwood Financial Group. It was the key to their salvation and my vindication. I was ready to use it. The drive from the airport was a time machine. The landscape changed from the sprawling, anonymous concrete of the city to the familiar rolling green hills of the Midwest. The air grew cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. I saw the old gas station where I used to fill my tank with money I had saved from odd jobs. I passed the diner where I had my first date. Everything was the same, yet everything was different. I was a ghost visiting a past life. As I neared my parents' house, a wave of nostalgia mixed with a familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. The house itself was a landmark in my memory, a modest two-story colonial with a wraparound porch and a yard that was always impeccably manicured. My father had a green thumb, a patient hand with the earth that he never seemed to have with people. The lawn, I noticed with a sharp pang, was overgrown. The paint on the porch railing was peeling. The house looked tired, worn down by the same invisible forces that were wearing down its inhabitants. I pulled into the driveway, the familiar crunch of gravel under my tires. My mother was sitting on the porch swing, wrapped in a worn shawl, a mug of coffee clutched in her hands. Her face was lined with a deep weariness I had never seen before. When she looked up and saw me, her expression was a mixture of shock and something close to fear. She rose slowly, her movements stiff. "Daniel," she said, her voice a reedy whisper. "You came. I told you I would, Mom." I walked up the steps, and for the first time in years, she opened her arms and hugged me. The embrace was fragile, a testament to her vulnerability. I held her, feeling the bone-deep exhaustion in her body. It was a strange, emotional moment. This was the woman who had cried tears of pity for me, and now she was crying tears of something else, something I couldn't yet define. My father came out of the house, his posture as rigid as ever, but his shoulders were slumped. His hair, once a thick black, was now a shocking white. He looked smaller, diminished. "I told you not to come," he said, his voice a low growl. "I didn't listen," I replied, my eyes meeting his. I didn't flinch. I was not the boy who had to seek his approval. I was the man who had the power to save him. We went inside, and the house felt different. The air was heavy, thick with tension and the smell of old dust. The family photos on the mantel, the ones with my parents looking younger, happier, seemed to mock the current reality. We sat in the living room, a space that had always felt safe and warm, but now felt cold and foreign. My mother made coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she poured. The silence was unbearable. Finally, my father spoke, his voice low and heavy. "Why are you here, Daniel? We're not discussing this. The house is a private matter." "It's not a private matter when it's about to be auctioned off," I said, my voice calm. "I want to help you." "I said we don't need your charity," he snapped, the anger finally breaking through his stoicism. "We can take care of our own problems. I've always taken care of my family." "Have you, Dad?" I said, the question hanging in the air. "Or have you been so focused on proving you could do it alone that you've pushed everyone away?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and hurt. My mother put a hand on his arm, a silent plea for him to calm down. "I've never asked anyone for anything," he said, his voice a low rumble. "My entire life I've built everything with my own two hands. You wouldn't understand. You've always had it easy. You just left." "I left because you told me to," I said, my voice rising slightly. "You told me I'd never succeed. You told me to get out and not come crawling back. I took your advice, I left, and I worked my entire life to prove you wrong. I worked harder than you could ever imagine." "Work is not about money, Daniel," he said, shaking his head. "It's about honor. It's about building a life that matters. What did you build? A bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet. You're a ghost. You're an accountant, not a man. The words were a direct hit, a perfect echo of the man I had been trying to escape for decades. You're right, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. I am a ghost, but I'm a ghost who owns the very building where they're going to auction off your house. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. What are you talking about? The bank, I said, leaning forward. Midwestern Regional Bank. The building you think you're going to lose your house to. I'm one of the largest investors in that bank. I'm a majority shareholder. The silence was deafening. My mother gasped, a small choked sound. My father just stared at me, his mouth slightly open, a look of utter disbelief on his face. The air in the room was electric with the weight of the revelation. It wasn't about the money. It was about the irony, the poetic justice. The son they had dismissed as a failure had become a force in the very system they despised, a master of a world they couldn't comprehend. The son who had been nothing but numbers on a spreadsheet was now the very thing that could save them. My father finally broke the silence, a low, humorless laugh escaping his lips. You're lying, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew me. He knew I was a terrible liar. I'm not, I said, pulling the manila envelope from my bag. I reached inside and pulled out the single sheet of paper. This is a document from the Northwood Financial Group, your new loan servicer. It's a holding company that owns your mortgage now. Your mortgage is no longer with the bank, it's with me. I laid the paper on the coffee table. My father looked at it, then at me, then back at the paper. My mother, her hands still shaking, picked it up and read the words, her eyes scanning the official-looking letterhead. The words, "Loan acquired," stood out in bold, and underneath, the name of the new servicer. It was real. It was all real. My father just sat there, his shoulders slumped, the last of his fight draining out of him. The final scene was here. The boy who was nothing had become everything. The silence that followed my revelation was thicker than any I had ever experienced. It wasn't a comfortable, understanding silence. It was a silence filled with shock, disbelief, and a dawning, painful realization. My mother sat with the document in her hands, reading and rereading it as if it were a foreign language she was trying to decipher. My father, on the other hand, just stared at me. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, almost childlike confusion. The man who had always been so sure of everything, who had built his life on a foundation of tangible realities, was now confronted with a truth he couldn't comprehend. Northwood Financial Group, he mumbled, his voice a low, raspy whisper. That's your company. It's a holding company I created to acquire your loan, Dad, I said, my voice gentle. The bank sold it to me as a non-performing asset. It's a technical term for a loan that's not being paid. They were ready to write it off. You bought our house? My mother asked, her voice barely audible. I bought the debt, I clarified. The mortgage. The house is still yours. The loan is just now with me. My father finally broke his gaze from me and looked at the document in my mother's hands. He reached for it, and she passed it to him. He held it, his large, calloused hands trembling slightly. He was a man who worked with concrete and steel, and this piece of paper, a symbol of my abstract, successful life, seemed to weigh a ton in his hands. Why? He asked, the word hanging in the air. It wasn't a question of fact, but a question of motive. Why would I do this? Why would I, the son he had dismissed, come back to save him? Because I couldn't just watch you lose everything, I said, the truth simple and raw. I couldn't just stand by and let a lifetime of hard work disappear. But why didn't you just give us the money? My mother said, her voice laced with a confusion that was more heartbreaking than any anger. You know why, I said, looking from her to him. You would have never accepted it. Dad would have seen it as charity, a confirmation that he was a failure. You would have pushed me away again. My father's face contorted, a mixture of shame and pride warring within him. He looked at the document, at the proof of my success and the proof of his failure. It was the ultimate irony. He had spent his life telling me I would never succeed, and now my success was his only lifeline. The truth of it was almost too much to bear. You've been a ghost, he said, the words a weary sigh. "You've never been honest with us." "I was honest with you," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I was just a different kind of honest. I told you I was working, that I was making a life for myself. You just never believed me. You only believed in what you could see, what you could touch. You told me an engineer couldn't own the road. I didn't just own the road, Dad. I owned the bank that held the mortgage on the road." My father didn't have a response. He just sat there, defeated. The man who had been my personal mountain to climb, my lifelong obstacle, was finally out of strength. The long, silent standoff between us had finally come to an end, and neither of us had won. We had both lost, in different ways. My mother, her eyes red-rimmed, walked over to me and took my hand. We were wrong, Daniel. About you. About everything." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. It wasn't an apology, not a full one, but it was a start. It was an acknowledgement that their narrative, the one that had defined my life for so long, was a lie. It was a crack in the wall they had built between us. "We just wanted you to be happy," she continued, her voice choked with emotion. We were afraid. We had a hard life. We wanted to protect you from that. We thought—" She trailed off, unable to find the words. "You thought the only way to protect me was to push me," I finished for her. "I understand. I think I understand now. But that's not how you help someone. You don't help them by breaking them. You help them by giving them the tools to build their own life, and then you stand back and let them do it." My father finally looked at me, his eyes full of a raw emotion I had never seen before. "I'm sorry, son," he said, the words a struggle to get out. "I'm sorry for everything I said. I was a fool." The apology wasn't what I had been waiting for my entire life, but it was enough. It was a surrender of pride, a painful admission of his own failures. It was the first step on a long road to understanding. We were finally talking, not as the failed son and the disappointed father, but as two men, two human beings, with a shared history of pain and a complex, difficult love for each other. The immediate crisis was over. The house was safe, but the real work was just beginning. We had to rebuild our relationship, to find a new way to be a family. We had to unlearn the habits of a lifetime, the words that had become a part of our DNA. The house was just a building, a symbol of everything we had lost and everything we had found. The real home was the family we were finally beginning to rebuild. The ghost was finally home. I sat with them for hours, not as a successful investor, but as their son, a man who had left and come back. We talked about my life, the real one, the one they never saw. I told them about the sleepless nights, the setbacks, the moments of doubt. I told them about the satisfaction of building something from nothing, brick by brick, just like my father had in his own way. And for the first time, they listened. They didn't judge. They just listened. The silence between us was finally one of acceptance, a quiet understanding of a shared, complicated history. The days that followed were a slow, deliberate dance of reconnection. The air in the house was no longer thick with tension, but with a fragile, almost palpable vulnerability. My father, the man who had always worn a suit of armor, was now exposed. He still had his moments of gruffness, his old habits of stoicism, but they were now punctuated by quiet moments of reflection. I would find him sitting on the porch, staring out at the yard, and he would sometimes, unprompted, start to talk. He talked about his own father, a man who had also been hardened by a different kind of life, a farmer who lost his land in the Great Depression. He talked about the fear of not having enough, the constant anxiety of a paycheck-to-paycheck existence. His story was a painful echo of my own. He had tried to protect me, just as my mother said, by pushing me towards a path of safety and predictability. His words were not born of malice, but of fear, a fear that I would suffer the same fate as his father, a man he had seen broken by circumstances beyond his control. I listened, truly listened, for the first time in my life. I saw him not as an adversary, but as a man shaped by his own difficult past. The man who had built his life with his own two hands was also a man who had lived in the shadow of his own father's failure. His inability to see my success in an abstract world of numbers and investments was not a judgment on me, but a reflection of his own limited worldview, a worldview born from a life of hard, physical labor. My mother, on the other hand, was the emotional bridge between us. She was a different kind of vulnerable, more open and expressive with her emotions. She told me about the years after I left, the quiet sorrow she felt, the constant worry that I wasn't eating enough, that I was working too hard. She had always wanted to be a part of my life, but my father's constant negativity and her own quiet fear had kept her from reaching out. She confessed that every time I called on a holiday, she would hang up and cry, knowing that the gap between us was growing wider and wider. We talked for hours, late into the night. We talked about the things we had never talked about before, the mistakes we had made, the words we wished we could take back, the love that had always been there but had been buried under years of resentment and pride. My sister, Sarah, was a silent witness to our slow healing process. She would bring us coffee, a look of quiet relief on her face, happy that the family she had tried so hard to keep together was finally mending itself. The question of the mortgage was still hanging in the air, a silent elephant in the room. On the third day of my visit, after a particularly long and emotional conversation, my father brought it up. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice low. "With the house, we owe you." "You don't owe me anything," I said, a wave of emotion washing over me. "This isn't a debt, Dad. It's an investment. It's a gift." "A gift is a gift," he said, shaking his head. "This is a loan. We'll pay you back." "We have to. I'm not a charity case." I knew his pride was a delicate thing, a fragile bird that would fly away at the first hint of an insult. I had to handle this carefully. I had to find a way to honor his dignity while still giving him the help he desperately needed. "I have a business proposition for you," I said, my voice slipping back into the professional tone I used in my meetings. "It's not charity. It's a business deal. We both have to agree to it, and we both have to honor our part of the deal." He looked at me, a glimmer of interest in his eyes. This was a language he understood. Business, deals, work. "I need a man on the ground," I said, my voice low and serious. "I'm expanding my real estate portfolio here in the Midwest. I'm looking at acquiring some smaller properties, some older homes, some distressed assets. I need a man who knows how to fix things, a man with a good eye for structure, a man who knows the difference between good wood and rotten wood." My father's face lit up with a spark of the old fire. "I know all that," he said, a hint of his old confidence returning. "I've been doing it my entire life." "I know," I said, a small smile on my face. "I need you to be my project manager. I need you to be the boots on the ground. You'll assess the properties. You'll manage the contractors. You'll oversee the renovations. It's a job, Dad. It's a real job. And it's the only way I can think of for you to pay me back." His eyes were glistening with unshed tears, but he kept his voice steady. "What about the mortgage?" "The mortgage is paid in full," I said. "The house is yours, free and clear. It's the signing bonus, the first payment on the new contract. I have the papers here. They just need your signature. And you can get back to work. Real work." He looked at me, then at the documents I had ready for him. The man who had always seen me as a failure was now being given his salvation by my success. It was the ultimate irony, the perfect poetic end to a lifetime of struggle. He picked up the pen and, with a hand that was still trembling, signed the papers. His signature was a testament to his pride, to his dignity, to his newfound understanding of the son he had lost and found again. We had all been searching for something. My father for a sense of purpose, my mother for a way to bring her family together, and me for a way to prove them wrong. In the end, we had all found what we were looking for, but it wasn't what we thought it would be. We had found a new way to be a family, a new way to love each other, and a new way to understand each other. The house was no longer a symbol of our pain. It was now a symbol of our new beginning. The ghost in the machine was finally home, and he was home to stay. The business relationship we forged was, in many ways, an extension of our newfound personal one. It was built on a different kind of respect, one earned not through birthright, but through shared purpose. My father was a natural at the job. He had an innate ability to spot structural flaws, to see the potential in a dilapidated property, to manage a crew of contractors with the quiet authority he had always possessed. He was back in his element, doing what he loved, and it was a joy to witness. I set him up with an old pickup truck, a mobile phone, and a small office space I leased for him in town. We had weekly conference calls, and the conversations were no longer strained and full of unspoken resentments. They were about business, budgets, timelines, material costs. He would tell me about a new property he had found, his voice filled with a passion I hadn't heard in years. He would describe the plans he had for it, the way he would bring it back to life. He was no longer just a man doing a job. He was an artist, a creator, a builder in the truest sense of the word. My mother, in her own way, was also transformed. With the fear of losing the house gone, she was lighter, happier. She started a small garden in the backyard, her hands a testament to a life of hard work, but now working for a different kind of harvest. She would send me pictures of the flowers she was growing, her vegetables, her small world of beauty she was creating. She was no longer just a housewife. She was the quiet keeper of a new home, a new life. The unspoken words were still there, of course. The past was not something that could be erased with a signature. We never talked about the decades of silence, the years of pain, the long road that had led us to this point. But the absence of those words was no longer a sign of a chasm. It was a sign of a truce. We were living in the present, a fragile peace treaty that we were all committed to honoring. There was a moment that solidified the change for me, a moment that made all the pain, all the years of struggle worth it. I was in town for a visit, and I decided to surprise my father on one of his job sites. He was standing on a ladder, a hammer in his hand, shouting instructions to a crew of men. He looked so much like the man I remembered from my childhood, the man who had built our world with his own two hands. He saw me and jumped off the ladder, a wide smile on his face. "Daniel, what are you doing here? I thought you were back in the city." "I just wanted to see how the project was coming along," I said, a smile on my own face. He led me around the house, a run-down Victorian he had acquired for me. He pointed out the new wiring, the restored hardwood floors, the work he was doing with his crew. "This is going to be something special, son," he said, his voice filled with pride. "It's going to be a home again. A family is going to live here." He wasn't talking about the house as an investment, as a number on a spreadsheet. He was talking about it as a home, a place of safety, a place of love. He was talking about the human element, the part of the business I had always been so good at but had never articulated. He had a different kind of vision, a different kind of value system, and for the first time I saw how our two worlds, the abstract and the tangible, could come together. Later that day we were sitting on the porch of their house, sipping iced tea. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light on the overgrown lawn that was now starting to look like a yard again. The sound of crickets filled the air, a familiar symphony of a small-town summer night. My father was quiet for a long time, just watching the sunset. Then he turned to me, his eyes filled with a raw, honest emotion. "I should have told you I was proud of you a long time ago," he said, his voice low and raspy. "I'm proud of the man you've become, Daniel. You built something real, something that matters." The words weren't a grand gesture, not a public declaration. They were just two simple sentences, said in the quiet privacy of a warm summer night. But they were everything. They were the culmination of a lifetime of struggle, a final, definitive apology. They were the words I had left home to find, the words that had fueled my journey, the words that had finally set me free. I couldn't speak. I just looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw a reflection of myself in his eyes. A man who had built something from nothing. A man who had found his own way in the world. A man who was finally definitively home. I knew then that the house, the mortgage, the entire saga had never been about money. It had been about something far more valuable, about family, about forgiveness, about the long and winding road we all take to find our way back to each other. The ghost was no longer a ghost. He was a son, and he was home. The forgiveness was not a sudden burst of light, but a slow, quiet dawn. It was in the shared silence over coffee, in my father's quiet pride as he showed me a new project, in my mother's gentle touch on my arm. We were learning to be a family again, a family of adults, not just a father and mother who held all the power and a son who felt like he had none. The balance had shifted, not with me in power, but with us on equal footing, two men and a woman who had finally found a way to communicate. The truth of my success, however, was still a fragile thing. I was not just a successful investor. I was the investor behind the bank that had almost taken their house. The revelation had been a bombshell, and the fallout was still being felt, not in anger, but in a quiet, simmering shame that my parents couldn't fully shake. My father, in particular, was a man of immense pride. He had been a provider, a protector, his entire life. To have been saved by the son he had dismissed, to have had his failures exposed in such a public and definitive way, was a wound to his dignity that would take time to heal. I knew this. I saw it in the way he sometimes looked at me, a quick flicker of a painful memory in his eyes before he quickly looked away. I saw it in the way he would sometimes retreat into himself, into the same silent stoicism he had always used as a shield. I had saved the house, but I hadn't saved him from the weight of his own shame. That was something he had to do for himself. One evening, after a long day of working on one of his new projects, we were sitting on the porch again. The topic was the future. My father, in his new role as a project manager, was more animated, more engaged with the world than I had seen him in years. He was planning his next move, his next project, and it was a joy to see. "I was thinking," he said, his voice low, "that we could turn the old house into a rental property. It's got good bones. We could fix it up, put a little money into it, and it could be a steady source of income." The idea was a good one, a practical, logical plan. But it also revealed a deep-seated anxiety. He was thinking about a safety net, about a way to build a financial foundation that he couldn't have taken away from him. He was still haunted by the ghost of the foreclosure, the fear of losing everything. "That's a good idea, Dad," I said, my voice gentle. "But you don't have to worry about that anymore. The house is yours. It's paid for. You don't have to sell it. You don't have to rent it. It's a home. It's a place where you and Mom can live the rest of your lives." He shook his head, a look of frustration on his face. "You don't understand, Daniel. I can't just accept this. It's not right. It's a debt of honor. I can't just take it. I have to pay you back." "You're paying me back with your work," I said, the words simple and true. "You're paying me back by building something real, by using your talent. You're giving me something far more valuable than money, Dad. You're giving me a partner. You're giving me a piece of yourself I never had before." He was quiet for a long time, the silence stretching out between us. I knew I couldn't force him to accept it. He had to come to terms with it in his own time. I had to let him find his own way to forgiveness. The next morning I was getting ready to leave. My mother hugged me, a long, tearful embrace. "Come back soon, Daniel," she said, her voice full of a love that was no longer hesitant. My father was standing by the car, his hands in his pockets. He was a man who hated goodbyes, and he looked uncomfortable, awkward. "I'm going to go to the bank this morning," he said, his voice low. "I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to tell them I'm closing my account." I looked at him, a sudden understanding dawning on me. He wasn't talking about my bank, the one that held the mortgage. He was talking about the local bank he had used for decades, the bank he had trusted his entire life, the place that had, in his mind, betrayed him. "You don't have to do that, Dad," I said. "It wasn't their fault. It was a business decision. They were just following protocol." "No," he said, shaking his head. "They're a bank. They're just numbers on a spreadsheet. They don't understand what a house means. They don't understand what a family means. You do." He looked at me, his eyes full of a new kind of respect, a new kind of understanding. "You were right all along, Daniel. You were the one who understood. You were the one who built something real, something that matters. You're not a cog in the machine. You're the engine." The words were a direct callback to the ones he had used to dismiss me so many years ago. It was the final, definitive apology, the full surrender of his pride. He was acknowledging my success, not just as an abstract concept, but as a real, tangible thing that had saved his family. He was forgiving me for my success, and in doing so, he was forgiving himself for his own perceived failures. The weight of his shame was finally starting to lift. The road to forgiveness was long, but we were finally on it. The months that followed were a testament to the power of human connection and the quiet grace of forgiveness. My visits home became more frequent, no longer a dutiful obligation, but a genuine desire to be with my family. I would drive from the airport and feel a different kind of homecoming, not to the ghosts of my past, but to the living, breathing reality of my present. My father, in his new role as my project manager, flourished. He was in his element, a man of tangible things, working with his hands and his mind. He found a new sense of purpose, not in just providing for his family, but in building a new kind of legacy, a legacy of restoration. He was no longer just building houses. He was rebuilding a sense of community, a sense of worth for the old forgotten homes of the small town. My mother, with her renewed sense of hope and security, was the quiet center of our new family. She would host family dinners, a tradition we had lost over the years. My sister Sarah and her family would come, and the house would be filled with the sound of laughter, of stories, of a family finally, truly together. The past was not forgotten. It was just a part of our story, a testament to the long and winding road we had all taken to find our way back to each other. The secret of my role in the bank remained just that, a secret. No one outside of our family knew the truth. It was a shared secret, a bond that connected us in a way nothing else could. It was a symbol of the ultimate irony, the poetic justice that had brought us together. The son they had dismissed as a failure had become the very force that had saved them. One day I was sitting on the porch with my father watching the sunset. He was a different man, calmer, more at peace. He looked at me, a rare, soft look in his eyes. "You know," he said, his voice low and thoughtful, "when you were a boy, I was so afraid for you. I was so afraid you would make the same mistakes I did. I was so afraid you wouldn't have what it takes to survive in this world." "I know, Dad," I said, a soft smile on my face. "I know you were, and I know you just wanted to protect me." "I was a fool," he said, shaking his head. "I was a fool to think I knew what was best for you. You had to find your own way. You had to build your own life. And you did it. You built something I could never have imagined. Something is better." The word hung in the air, a simple, profound admission. Better. It was an acknowledgement that my way was not just different, but superior. It was the final, definitive stamp of approval, the one I had been waiting for my entire life. "I didn't do it alone," I said, the words simple and true. "You gave me the fire, Dad. You gave me the motivation. Every time you told me I would fail, I worked a little bit harder. You were the engine, Dad. You were the one who pushed me forward. The house, the money, the bank. It was all just a way for me to prove to you that your words were a lie. But in the end, it was your words that created me. They were the crucible that forged me." He looked at me, a long, searching look in his eyes. He didn't say anything, but his silence was more eloquent than any words. He understood. He understood that our relationship was not just a story of a father who was wrong and a son who was right. It was a story of a father who, in his own difficult way, had helped his son find his path. It was a story of two men, a family, who had found a new way to love each other, a new way to understand each other, a new way to be a family. The sun finally set, and the darkness enveloped us. But it was not a cold, empty darkness. It was a darkness filled with the quiet comfort of a shared history, a shared love, a shared understanding. The ghost was finally home, and he was home to stay, not just as a son, but as a man who had finally, definitively, found his place in the world. The legacy of his past was not one of failure, but one of resilience, of a quiet, unyielding strength. It was a legacy of a different kind, one that was built not with wood and steel, but with love, forgiveness, and the long, slow, and beautiful process of coming home. The years passed, as they always do, with a quiet, relentless pace. My parents grew older, their steps a little slower, their faces a little more lined with the wisdom of a long, full life. The house remained the center of our universe, a constant, stable presence in a world of change. My father's projects for me grew in scale and scope. He became a well-respected figure in the community, the man who brought old homes back to life, who saw the value in things others had long forgotten. His work was his legacy, a testament to a different kind of success, a success he could see and touch, a success he had built with his own 2 hands. My mother's garden flourished, a riot of color and life that mirrored the newfound vibrancy in her soul. She would send me pictures of her grandchildren, my sister's kids, playing in the yard, their laughter echoing the same joy I had once known in that same space. The house was no longer a prison of the past, but a vessel for the future, a home filled with the new memories of a new generation. My role as the silent partner, the ghost in the machine, was now a quiet part of my life. I had a different kind of success now, one that was no longer about proving a point, but about building something meaningful. I had a family, a real, tangible connection to the people who had, in their own difficult way, made me who I was. The need to prove myself had long since faded, replaced by a quiet, deep satisfaction in the life I had built. One day, I was at my parents' house, a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that felt suspended in time. My father and I were sitting on the porch swing, just watching the world go by. We didn't talk much, we didn't need to. The silence between us was now a comfortable, familiar friend. "You know, son," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I'm glad you came home." "Me too, Dad," I said, my voice soft. He looked at me, a long, searching look in his eyes. It was the same look he had given me the day I came back, the day I had revealed the truth. But this time, it was filled not with confusion or shame, but with a deep, profound sense of peace. "I was so wrong about you," he said, the words simple and honest. "I was so wrong about everything. I should have told you that a long time ago." "It's okay, Dad," I said, a wave of emotion washing over me. "It's all okay." He reached out and put a hand on my shoulder. His hand was gnarled with age, with a lifetime of hard work, but it was a warm, comforting weight. "I'm proud of you, Daniel," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of the man you've become." The words were a final, definitive period at the end of a long, complicated sentence. They were the words that had defined my life, the words I had worked my entire life to hear. And now that I had heard them, I realized something profound. The approval I had sought for so long was no longer something I needed. I had found my own worth, my own value, in the years of building something real, something that mattered. The words were a gift, but they were no longer a necessity. They were just a final, beautiful affirmation of a journey that had finally, definitively come to an end. I looked out at the street, at the house that had once been a symbol of my failure and my escape, and was now a symbol of my homecoming and my success. I looked at the man who had once been my greatest obstacle and was now my greatest ally. And I looked at my own hands, the hands that had built an empire of numbers and spreadsheets, and I saw a different kind of strength, a different kind of honor. My parents taught me that I would never succeed. They were wrong, but in a strange, ironic, and beautiful way, their words had also given me the greatest gift of all. They had given me the fire, the drive, the unrelenting determination to prove them wrong. They had given me the crucible in which my success was forged, and in the end, they had given me the home I had always been searching for, a home not of bricks and mortar, but of love, forgiveness, and the quiet, simple grace of a family reunited. The journey had been long, but I was finally home, and I was home to stay.